Welcome to Innsmouth, stranger.
Greetings travellers and welcome to our 36th excursion into Innsmouth. I'm Rob Poyton, one of your guides on the Innsmouth Book Club, and as usual I'm joined again today by the ever caprine Tim Mendes.
Greetings folks.
And the erudite curator of Innsmouth Museum, John Chadwick.
Hello.
And we've come straight into the town square to say, I've got to say chaps, after all that Arctic adventure last week, I'm quite glad to be back in Innsmouth.
It's warmer. Yeah, scary, isn't it? yeah, it's warmer. Don't think I've run so fast since they called Last Orders.
Yeah, you took the lead there. You were ahead of all of us.
Yeah, I did. I was out.
And I did do a quick head count, if you'll pardon the pun at the end, and we did get all our guests out, so everyone was safe. Because I was sure while we were in that facility there was an extra guest. It seemed odd to me. The numbers didn't quite match up.
You never know. There might be a thing running around in rural America somewhere. You never know.
Yeah. I wonder, the thing in Innsmouth, that'd be quite a good crossover.
It wouldn't it? Yeah.
That'd be like King Kong versus Godzilla, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
Shadow over Thingsmouth. Ba-boom. Thank you very much. Oh, I'll be here all week.
Yeah.
Oh, Tim, there's another anthology.
There is, yeah. There is.
Shadow over things.
Oh,
right.
Nice.
I'm writing that down. So before we start, we just wanted to mention a couple of news items. Tim, you got a new book coming out?
I have, yes. I call it a novella, but it started off as a novella, but after developmental edits, it's probably more of a novel, because I added 20k to it in the developmental.
Wow.
Miracle Growth is my. It's my take on if Day of the Triffids was written by Lovecraft and then turned into a movie by Simon Pegg and Edgar Frost. Edgar Wright, sorry. Yeah. It's ridiculous. It's all about like killer plants. It's called Miracle Growth, and it actually the paperback is launching in time for Valentine's Day. Treat your loved ones. Yeah, exactly. Treat your loved ones to some vine death. It launches its official launch is the middle of March. So I'm excited about that because it's been in the pipeline for a while. I'm really quite pleased with how it's turned out. It's got great cover art in it,
Yeah, you get. I'm really jealous of your books. You get real good covers. I'm reading the Pseudopod that rocked the cradle at the moment, and that's I'm really enjoying that.
Oh, excellent.
That's great artwork on the cover.
Yeah, Daedra did a superb job on that. Daedra J. Owen, she did an amazing job on that. That was without any input from me.
Wow.
She just went away and just came back with it, and she was this, and she went, "Oh, I didn't ask you what you wanted, but I thought something like this," and I went, "Yeah, that's what I wanted. That's exactly what I wanted."
Nice. That's nice when that happens, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely.
And yes, the other release, which has actually been out a couple of weeks by the time this will be released, is Corridors. The latest Innsmouth Gold anthology is out at last. And that's a King in Yellow anthology. 13 stories from the Innsmouth writing circle. Set in I won't say it's an original setting because lots of people have done post-apocalyptic underground settings. But that is the setting. The twist for us is these underground societies are all enthralled to the ministry of the King in Yellow. So we've got 13 really cracking stories in there. I have to say I really did enjoy putting this one together. And that's out now on Amazon, or of course you can get it direct from the Innsmouth Gold site as well. So speaking of books, we're in your bookshop today. Tim, are we going in there first?
We are, yes. Come on in then, chaps. I'll just open up. Ignore. Yeah, you'll have to excuse the mess in here. All these bottles lying around. Old Zadok Allen turned up last night when I was locking up. I said he could crash here last night.
Was Boris with him?
The silly sod had been caught talking to the tourists again.
Oh dear.
So, so he was having to lay low. I had to turf him out a couple of hours ago.
I see, judging from what we got on the floor here, I see the Mad Dog 2020 is in vogue at the moment, is it? Oh.
Yeah. Mad Dog 2020's made it to Innsmouth.
I thought it was made in Innsmouth, to be honest.
Oh, maybe. That'll explain a lot.
All right. So, what are we reading today?
Yeah, today we're going to be taking a look at one of my personal favourites, Mr. Willem Hopfrog Pugmire. I love that name. WH Pugmire. We're going to take a look at one of his best-known works, I think it's fair to say. He's not that widely known, which is a real shame.
Yeah.
But we're going to take a look at the Inhabitants of Wraithwood.
Excellent. And I have to say, I'd often seen the name around, but I'm quite ashamed to say it was fairly recent I started reading him. And I got a couple of his collections, and of the modern writers, he's one of the most Lovecraftian in its classic sense, I think. What about you, John? Have you read much Pugmire before?
This was my first, actually. I was really impressed. I just thought it was incredibly well written.
Yeah, no, it's quite distinctive, isn't it? Because he's got that like the prose is down, very Lovecraftian, very traditional, but it's also very poetic. I mean, a lot of his stuff is actually prose poetry.
Yes.
And it's all kind of a bit Baudelaire and a bit Oscar Wilde, and it's very decadent. Yeah. It's all very decadent.
I did read that he seemed to have had a fusion of Oscar Wilde and Henry James to Lovecraft, which was a bit of a first for that.
Yeah, I can see that.
Not somebody that I know a lot about.
Well, he had quite an interesting life, and I'm sure we'll touch more on that as we go through.
Yes.
But yeah, he was born William Harry in 1951 in Seattle, and he later changed to Willem Hopfrog, which very nice. Obviously, the Poe reference there as well. And from a very early age, he seemed interested in horror stuff. I was reading while he was a student at school in the 70s. He played the character Count Pugsley at Jones's Fantastic Museum in Seattle.
Nice.
I love that when people call things, this is the Fantastic Museum. Yeah. It's great, isn't it?
Yeah. It brings to mind the Victorian carnivals, doesn't it?
It does.
Roll up to the fantastic, marvellous theatre of doom.
Come and see the bearded lady.
Yeah.
It makes me wonder how these places survive, though. I mean, how many people go by and go in, you know? Because there was one in Hellier as well that I noticed, in this strange little town of Somerset in Kentucky. That was the International Paranormal Museum, and I just can't imagine that many people going to that one little town. You know,
it seems to be a small town thing in the States where they have these Ma and Pa's Wax Museum or whatever, or. What's the town? It has a giant chair or something. That's the tourist attraction. Is a huge chair.
Yeah, because I was going to say, because Billy Connolly's Route 66, he goes to all these weird places. It's on Route 66 somewhere, because the big chair was one of the places he visited. And two of the other places that I'll never forget, one of them was the Barbed Wire Museum.
Wow.
Yes. That's special.
You'd have to go in there, wouldn't you?
Yeah.
You'd have to
and the best one by far was the Toast Museum.
Toast?
Yeah. And it's toast, and people making pictures out of toast. And it's just what even makes you think that? Wake up one morning, you're there buttering your toast. Yeah, there's an idea.
You've got to admire their enterprise, haven't you, really? If you can make money out of a toast museum, then all power to your elbows.
There's a wonderful one in the first Sam and Max game that they brought out. That was the world's largest ball of string museum, and there was a restaurant or something on the top of it.
I do love that stuff. Yeah, so this Count Pugsley character was based on Lon Chaney in London After Midnight, which I have to say is one of my favourite monsters. Obviously, we've never seen the film, but that still, or those stills in particular, are some of my favourite monster pictures.
Yeah, me too. It's like the Holy Grail, isn't it? It's just...
I hope that'll turn up one day.
Yeah, you wonder if it'd be a disappointment, didn't you? If it's like,
yeah, I did have that disappointment once I saw the stills in it. I was reading like a book about horror cinema, and there's all these stills in it. I was like, oh, I have to see that. And I was like, nope.
Not there. And, well, speaking of magazines and stuff, Forrest J. Ackerman, Monsters of Filmland, I think Pugmire got very involved with that at one point.
Yeah.
And in fact, issue 69 was dedicated to Pugmire in his Count Pugsley outfit. So that's quite early on. The other, I guess, major thing about Pugmire, he was raised in a very religious Mormon household.
Yes. Yeah.
And he actually served as a missionary in Northern Ireland. Because that's what Mormon people do, I guess. We've all had them knocking on the door.
Yeah.
I suppose. And that was where he first discovered Lovecraft and began writing to Robert Bloch.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
And I think, I don't know how old he was at this time, he's obviously quite a young man. I think it's amazing that people can do this, because at that age I never thought of doing that.
No.
I was reading a lot of this stuff, but I mean, obviously Lovecraft wasn't around, but other people were. And like, would you write to Brian Aldiss or something? Or
yeah, it's strange, isn't it? Because I mean, Ramsey Campbell did the exact same thing, didn't he?
Yeah.
He was just like, because he wrote that at school. He wrote his first collection, Inhabitant of the Lake, at school.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, in an exercise book. And when he should have been actually doing his work.
Brilliant.
He wrote it in a bloody exercise book. And it was just like, you know what? I'm going to send it to August Derleth.
Wow.
It's just like,
Wow. Like,
it worked out all right for Ramsey Campbell, didn't it? You know? Yeah.
I suppose it establishes a nice thread as well, because Bloch, when he was a very young man, wrote to Lovecraft, right? And that's probably at a similar age. So there's this nice continuity almost through, isn't it?
Mm. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I like it when that kind of thing happens, because you don't like to hear about, you know, I wrote to Robert Bloch and he told me to piss off. that would, you know.
Leave me alone.
Yeah, go away. It's nice that when that kind of thing happens, because to be fair, it probably does happen more than we hear about, because the response is negative. You know, I wrote to Stephen King and he told me to fuck off.
Yeah.
I got told to mind my own business by Scott Adams, who did Dilbert. I wrote to him for advice, and basically he replied, I don't look at other cartoonists' work. That was all he said, and I thought,
thanks very much.
It's
always slightly disappointing when you get that reaction, isn't it?
Yeah.
And I think nowadays, obviously, with communication the way it is, it's so easy to post on someone's Facebook, even if they're not managing their own Facebook page. Then you've got a very direct contact with people, I suppose.
Yeah.
So Pugmire came back to Seattle, and there he came out as gay, and obviously this caused a great conflict within the church and his religious views. He was actually given psychiatric treatment.
Oh, yes.
Which I guess, what are we talking here, 70s?
Yeah.
Sort of into the 80s, perhaps. So not that long ago that this kind of crap was still going on.
Yeah, no, yeah, he was pretty. Yeah. Wasn't he threatened with excommunication or something? And
I think so. Yeah.
Sort of, you know, we're going to disown you unless you go to therapy.
He actually requested it. I think he actually requested to be excommunicated.
Oh, right. Yeah.
Though he did come back to the church later on. So that's where he sort of got involved in the local punk rock scene and launched a zine called Punk Lust in 1981.
Yeah, Punk Lust.
A great title.
Yeah, he was heavily involved in the punk scene. Yeah, all that's really trashy sort of the end of it. You know, like the New York Dolls end of the punk spectrum. Yeah, he was heavily involved in that for a while. Yeah.
So yes, a big involvement with the punk scene, and of course he was writing at this time as well. And he was always very open about his Lovecraftian influence, I think, and he even said that was his aim, was to dwell forevermore within Lovecraft's Titan shadow. Being Lovecraftian is my identity as an artist, which is a nice quote. I wonder how many other artists, although they obviously cite Lovecraftian as an influence, would go to that extent and saying that Lovecraft forms the core of their artistic being.
Yeah, I think I probably would to a degree. I mean, that was kind of the impetus for me starting out, was I wanted to make stories like that I read. It was more sort of overall the pulp thing for me. like my entire raison d'etre is to make pulp stories like the ones that I like reading, because I think it was something that kind of drifted away a bit. So
I think the first thing I wrote was hugely inspired by Lovecraft. I think I even the first like 10 pages were kind of written like he would write as well, and then slowly my own voice came in.
Yeah, that's kind of what happened with me as well. I started off, I even did which Pugmire does, funnily enough, the shoon instead of shown. The spelling.
Yeah. Oh yeah, SHEWN.
Yeah. There's a nice little homage.
That's nice.
Yeah.
There's a story that Ramsey Campbell was told by his agent to stop writing. Lovecraft.
Yeah.
So I think he could be another one that could fall into that.
Yes.
And I think it's like any artist. I mean, when you start off as a band, you might start off doing, I don't know, I was going to say Rolling Stones covers, but then a lot of their early stuff was covers. There's a prime example. It takes you a while to find your own voice.
Oh,
and
yeah, definitely.
As a writer or a painter or anything, it's going to be the same thing. We can't escape our influences, and nor should we. But I think what we've seen with the Lovecraftian genre, especially, is how it adapts to the age it's written in, and so many offshoots coming off of it. I know we've spoken about that before.
Yeah,
but seems to be ever expanding, like Azathoth.
Yeah, Azathoth.
Anyway, let's we've spoken quite a lot already. Let's crack into the story, shall we? And then we'll add other little bits about Pugmire's life as we get through, I'm sure.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. Inhabitants of Raithwood. We open with this beautiful scene of our protagonist. His name's Hank, and he's a bit of a ne'er-do-well, I think it's safe to say. Yeah, he's on the run from the law, and he's drunk, and he's wet himself, and he's sort of crashed out under an oak tree. And I think it's at this point it's quite interesting to say, because Lovecraft and Machen, who we've covered recently, their characters are often them. Like their characters are basically them, like ciphers for them. Whereas Pugmire, most of his main characters, or at least a lot of his main characters, are actually based on his ex-boyfriend, who died of a heroin overdose. Yeah, and it was a bit of a shame, wow. and obviously it messed him up pretty badly, and a lot of it was a bit of a tribute to him. And this is one of them. This guy is basically based off his ex, pretty much, because like the whole bit about he got into drugs, and then he got into having the crime to pay for the drug habit, and all that's where that comes from. So so you've got that sort of element to it already, which I think adds the depth to it.
Right, I didn't appreciate any of that.
No.
And I think it's also quite interesting in that most of the Lovecraftian protagonists are quite clean-cut characters.
Yes.
Obviously with Shay, we've got that modern. I guess there's some parallels there with Shay in that sleazier side of life, perhaps.
Yes, definitely, and again in the setting, it's basically his version of Lovecraft country is the Sesqua Valley.
Yes.
In Seattle. And it's this kind of bohemian, whereas Lovecraft's was all very sort of, academia.
Yeah.
And Shay's was all, again,
Shay's was the LA underbelly, wasn't it?
Yeah. Whereas this is kind of like the Seattle underbelly. It's kind of like where all the the delinquent type of artist goes. They're all kind of drawn to it like a magnet, which I think is a really cool sort of thing.
And that has real life parallels, right, with these. Probably now not so much, but certainly in the 60s you had these places. Was Carmel one, I think, where of rundown places that authors and writers and poets would move into. Well, like where I live, like Brighton. Oh yeah.
That's it's kind of what Brighton was in the back in the 60s and 70s, and to a lesser extent today. It is still seen as this sort of bohemian mecca.
Yeah.
Although it's kind of been gentrified, but that's kind of what the Sesqua Valley is to Pugmire. It's his little
his sandbox.
Yeah, his sandbox. Yeah,
It's quite a rural sort of setting as well, isn't it? I know we've got like these small towns and everything, but whereas Shay is out and out urban, this is quite a more rural setting.
Yeah, this is all in the mountains.
Yeah.
The forest up there, around by the Green River and all that.
Yeah.
So I can picture it in my head because I've seen like documentaries about the Green River Killer and Ted Bundy.
Oh, right.
So it's all that area.
Was that sort of his kind of locale? Was it Bundy? Was that sort of place?
Yeah. Well, it was where he started out, but then he moved, obviously, various places. But yeah, that's kind of where it was. It's all the big trees, the big mountains, and all that. The mountains actually feature in a lot of his stories as a character in themselves.
Right.
Because this is where it differs from the Lovecraft. In Pugmire, there is magic.
Right. And it's quite sort of, I think there's like a Macon-esque influence.
Very, very much so, especially with this story.
Yes. Yeah.
But a lot actually, because his main recurring character throughout his Sesqua Valley stories is a guy known as Simon. And he plays the flute,
right?
And it's kind of implied that he is Pan, because he bewitches people with it and all the rest of it. And it's kind of implied that he's Pan, and he's always described as having a goatish, almost satyr-esque countenance. There's a couple of stories which revolve around this flute and him leading the Bacchanalia and all this kind of stuff. So it's already, it's kind of very bohemian, and so our main character's there crashed out, and he wakes up and he's wet himself, and he's in a hell of a state, and the moon's shining down at him, so he swears at it and throws his bottle at it, which I think's a great line.
Shades of Zadok Allen.
Yeah, shades of Zadok Allen, but it's that drunk thing, isn't it? When the sun's coming through your curtain, you've got fuck off. It's that kind of thing. And so he's sitting there, and all of a sudden, he describes a man as like Jesus appearing, holding a lamp.
Ginger.
A ginger Jesus. Yeah.
Ginger.
Yeah. But I love that because it's got that kind of, because already you've got that thing of salvation and kind of
hope,
savior and hope and all that. Yeah.
It's very visual, isn't it? I mean, one of the things that I spotted was that the sky was described as being violet and the moon was described as being orange. Those two colours really, really clash together. Yeah. And I just thought, God, everything. I just thought everything was so visual, and the image of the Jesus coming up, and he thought it was a second moon, but it was his lantern, it was his light. Yeah,
and it talks around almost the halo around him, the penumbra, doesn't it? Yeah.
But it's very sensory rich, if that's the right phrase to use. Yeah. The dampness, the smell, everything is very vivid.
Yeah, and that continues when he takes him into the house, because he's kind of like, let's get you cleaned up a bit. So he takes him into the house, and as soon as you get in, you're hit by, again, it's kind of like almost Victoriana and kind of decadent. It's almost like, Oscar Wilde's bedroom, isn't it? Because it's all like antiques and plush red velvets and brass chandeliers and... Again, very visual. It's almost like a Hogarth painting come to life, isn't it?
It reminded me of the illustrations that Austin Osman Spare did for the Book of Pleasures. Some of those that just feel so weird as well and so decadent. And in fact, there's a lot in this to do with pleasures as well. He mentions the word pleasure, even with having a bath.
Yeah, because that's like an almost orgasmic moment, isn't it?
He groaned with pleasure as he went into the hot bath.
And then you have the scene with Jesus. He puts his hands into the bath, but he doesn't stop him, and he brings him out and drips water over his hair. It is almost...
Which
erotic,
is very
isn't it?
It's John the Baptist kind of
Yeah.
imagery as well, isn't it?
It is, yeah.
It's initiatory, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah.
I think. And
it's being brought into this new world kind of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it's great. The imagery he uses something that runs through all of his stuff. I mean, especially his prose poems. I mean, some of those are just, it's just, it's like watching a film in your head. It's just, you can picture it so vividly.
You mentioned Spare there, John, as well. I think Aubrey Beardsley is another one for this, with those Poe pictures, which we'll see later on, because there's a lot of art in this, right?
Yeah.
There's a lot of art.
Yeah.
Also, he did do something called the Yellow Book, didn't he? Beardsley, which was full of lots of suggestive drawings, and you can't quite tell if a character's hermaphroditic or not, and things like that. Why it's almost on optical illusions and stuff. And but we discussed before doing this show Robert Mapplethorpe,
didn't
we?
Yeah,
and not that we could find many of his photographs of this nature, but he did do an awful lot of people with deformity, photographs of people with deformity. And everything was kind of with veils, which of course we get a lot of in this Pugmire story, and almost like silk draped over things, and it looks like a classical painting, but it's a black and white photograph of people who, I mean, it was criticised for whether or not it was exploitation or not. Yeah. And you know, I thought they were beautiful, regardless of the content.
Yeah. Well, when we were discussing it, I found that the other artist, I can't remember her name offhand.
Yeah.
She did the same thing, but she went around America going to freak shows and finding these people who were considered ugly and trying to present them as beautiful. And that was kind of her thing, was trying to make the deformed and the perceivably ugly beautiful. And and then she went on to corpses after that, and then she killed herself. So there's a story there, isn't there? You know,
there was a photo that you sent me.
Oh yeah, yes, yeah.
I was like, oh,
yeah, no, yeah.
I didn't even look at that one, to be honest. I've seen my share of Rotten.com and all the rest.
It was a little bit like seeing the morgue photos of the Black Dahlia. I thought,
yes, yeah.
Well, I used to have to prepare evidence bundles when I worked for the CPS at Crown Court. So you had to have 12 copies of everything, statements, everything, and that often included autopsy photos for the murder cases. So you know, and there's something very strange about seeing. I think John, we've spoken about this before, maybe in the Grimm fairy tales episode when we covered that, about seeing these things in a very mundane, down-to-earth kind of way.
Yeah.
Well, obviously, an autopsy is a scientific procedure. It's not intended to shock or, you know, make you feel anything other than this is what happened to this person. But yeah, it's odd, you know, 11 o'clock on a Monday morning, eating your bag of crisps and running stuff through the photocopy.
Oh, no.
So,
that's not what you want with your first cup of coffee of the day, is it?
No, interesting experience.
It's why those professions end up with people get a black sense of humour and become very blasé about things.
Gallows humour.
Gallows.
I'm not going to defend the Met in any way, shape or form over what's recently come out about those WhatsApp conversations. But I can see that basically the reason why that culture is there is because it helps those people survive.
Well, it's a survival instinct, I mean, my partner's father was a DCI.
Right.
And funnily enough, one of my ex's father was a copper and all. I seem to have a magnet for coppers.
It's that blue light on your head.
Yeah. And again, they've got a very, very, very dark sense of humour, which I appreciate personally. But you know, because I can see why some people wouldn't.
What's your excuse?
They do in the medical world. I mean, some of the stories that I was told by family members working within that, you know, they were almost like freak shows in their own in their own right.
Yeah. But again, we come back to this central point. We seem to circle around and come back to time and time again. Here we are talking about ostensibly horror films. I mean, we say weird fiction, and obviously that covers a wide range of things. But a significant amount of that is horror and body horror, especially last time we saw that firsthand. We narrowly escaped. So it is that thin line again between what is horror and what is entertainment, and where those worlds collide. What is true life. So, and again, this is one of the reasons certainly a writer like Pugmire is so effective, I think, is he gives it just enough, what's the word I want to use? Entertainment value is not quite the word I'm looking for. Relish, perhaps, or even an empathy at times.
Yeah, there is a definite empathy. Yeah, because that brings us up to the next sort of story beat, which is the photo album.
Yes, yeah.
Because basically he's told to wait while he gets a couple of people to come and see him to his room, and he sits down, and there's this red. Again, it is depicted as bright red, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah.
This book, red leather.
Hammer horror. It's that Hammer horror palette, isn't it?
Yeah. That it is. The whole palette of it is Hammer horror, isn't it? Down to the drapes and everything. But and so he starts looking through this, and it's all recreations of famous artwork.
Yeah.
But off kilter with some very strange subjects. Like, I like the description of the Mona Lisa. It depicted as this sort of almost seductress,
yes,
but strange looking and seductress. And when she's clipping her hands, she's digging a nail into her hands, and the one bit of vibrant colour in the whole photograph is a spot of red blood around the nail. And I love that image.
That's nice, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, and these photos are actually a big part of the story, but at this point, it's a strange bit of a mystery of why are these odd-looking people making recreations of these famous artworks? Because you've got the guy who's described as the gnome, who's he's lost his legs, and he's obviously got some physical deformity, and he's like an incubus on the veiled woman and all this kind of stuff. And
this was the Fuseli's nightmare picture, isn't it? Which I'm sure people will be familiar with. It's the sort of demon squatting on the sleeping lady.
Yes.
And there's the vague outline of the sort of weird horse in the shadows.
That was the nightmare, wasn't it? Which, of course, it wasn't that used on the front cover of some Lovecraft collection at some point.
I think it was, actually. Yeah, I think it was. Yeah. So, and then he's flipping through this, and then they appear. You've got Pyrrha appears, and you got this is what John was saying about the veil. She appears, and again, the way it's described, it's all very sort of plush and Victoriana, isn't it?
Yeah.
You got the black lace veil and the lacy gloves and the flowing gown.
A long black gown of antique silk with a tight brocade collar, decorated with raised patterns in gold and silver. So, it's very austere but colourful as well, isn't it?
Yeah. So he's taken up, and this is where he has his almost orgasmic moment in the bath. And so when he comes out, he sees that Pyrrha's room is open, her door is open, so he goes in to see her, and she's lying in bed, still wearing her veil, hugging a rope, like, almost sort of almost like a lover, really, it's described, isn't it?
Yeah.
She's sort of snuggling up to this length of rope. And he sort of sits there, and she starts to say lines from a Shakespeare play,
yes,
which ties into this character being a well-read ne'er-do-well, because his mother used to read in the Shakespeare. And all this stuff when he was a kid. So you can imagine it in the prison. He was the one who had to teach the rest of them how to write, the kind of thing. You know what I mean? Yeah. And this is where we meet the actual paintings, because above her is a painting of Ophelia, and the paintings, like you say, art and paintings and things run through not just this story, but a lot of Pugmire stuff. It's all painters and artists and all this kind of business. So there's that moment when he sees it, and it's kind of like, well, that makes sense now. Some weird sense, anyway.
Do you know which play that piece of poetry was from?
It does say at the start, was it Hamlet?
Yeah.
Oh, right, okay. Because that's obviously where Ophelia is from, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yes.
Right. Okay, and she famously, she dies from drowning.
Yeah.
It's a John Everett Millais painting and actually he didn't say that one was a replica. He actually just mentioned John Everett Millais.
Yes.
And it was almost as if like, oh, hang on, is that one real or what?
But then we get the same later on with this Kokoschka painting as well.
Yes.
Again, is that a real painting? And that I love this. This is a portrait of a tubercular count he met in Switzerland. I mean,
because that's once he's said goodnight to Pyrrha, she falls asleep, and he leaves the room and he goes out, and this is where he meets Oscar, who's in his room playing music, isn't he? He's playing like an Egyptian lute.
Yeah, which is what does an Egyptian lute look like? Does anyone?
I had one.
You had one?
Yeah.
Did you get it off your mummy?
Oh! I bought it in Luxor. I actually bought it for my brother-in-law because he plays lots of stringed instruments, and it was all mosaic. All the body was all mosaic,
nice.
like Arabic patterns, as you would imagine. But it was basically just a lint.
Yeah, it's called an oud, I believe.
Yes, an oud. You're right. An oud. Yeah. Wow.
It had very crude strings on it. I seem to remember.
You mean it's a crude oud?
Crude oud. Nice. Yeah, and Iblis is dancing to it on his stumps, which is a very sort of disquieting scene. And that's where he notices the painting of the tuberculate thing, and he notices the resemblance to Oscar. Oscar's looks like him, but not quite as deathly. So that, and then so they chat for a bit, and he takes him to his room, and this is where Hank finds his painting.
Yeah.
So everybody has their painting, and his painting is a Pickman. Mr. Richard Upton Pickman, and it's a painting of somebody hanging from a tree, a woman hanging from a tree, with three shadows underneath, and a ghoul in the foreground, leering at the viewer, sort of thing, leering out of the canvas, and quite reasonably, he's like, "Oh, what's this bloody horrible thing doing above my bed?" Yeah, and Oscar hands him a sketchbook. Apparently, this one is an authentic Pickman, and it was rescued from a derelict warehouse or something in Boston, but she used I think it's implied as that's his studio in Pickman's model.
It was like a secret studio in the warehouse.
Yeah, a secret studio. Yeah, because in Pickman's model, it is kind of like a hideaway, isn't it?
Was it in a cellar in the story?
Yeah.
Did they go down into the cellar because there's like the well?
Yes, it was.
Yeah.
The well. Yeah.
It's in a slum, isn't it?
Yeah. So I think it's implied that it's that where they recovered it from, because it was when they were clearing it to build new houses. So it's a slum, but it was slum clearance kind of thing. And there's a sketchbook as well. So it's got his original sketches in there, but the three figures under the corpse in the sketches are actually ghouls. And this one that's hung up apparently is an unfinished work, and the finished one is in a gallery in Arkham, which I thought was a nice touch. He doesn't like it. Let's say. I think the description of the ghoul is brilliant. The thick lips and the teeth,
Big square teeth. Yeah.
cacodemonical as well. He gets in there as well, which is always a good word.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. He also gets undulating in it somewhere.
Hooray!
Yeah, it gets undulating. Yeah. I'm not sure if the moon's gibbous, but I feel it should be. You know what I mean? Yeah. So, he has a bit of a nap, and then he wakes up and he's taken to see the old crone, isn't he? Before he goes to sleep.
Just one thing I wanted to mention there was, he goes into the room he's feeling tired, and they show him into the room and say that, there's some pyjamas in that chiffonier, which I presume is some sort of chest of drawers or something, and the pyjamas are bright yellow, which I thought was a nice little touch as well. So there's little bits of yellow creeping in as well in that palette.
Yeah, that's a nice touch, especially considering what happens in outside in a bit. Yeah, well, I'll come back to that. I haven't really picked up on that before. That's interesting.
But also, with them being pyjamas, and that's an item of clothing that you would wear to bed and to sleep, there's something that fits with a lot of the other decadence that comes in, because there's opium being passed around and all sorts.
Yeah, well, this is where we're heading now, because he goes and sees the woman of the house, and it turns out that she's the Mona Lisa, and he says that she's old, but the only thing that gives it away is her face and hands. Her hair is still silky.
That's quite creepy, isn't it?
Yeah, and she's described as almost very attractive in a way.
Younger or something, yeah.
Yeah, it's and there's a lovely line where, because it's written in the first person, there's a lovely line where he goes, "Yeah, this is my kind of girl," which I thought was an interesting little thing, considering. And she's got this guest book, and she invites him to stay. And he's got nowhere else to go. I mean, he's pretty much screwed. If he goes back on the road, he'd probably get picked up by the Rozzers, thrown in the clink. He's a drug addict. There's drugs going about. He's a happy camper.
He's landed on his feet, isn't he, really, in this?
Landed on his feet, yeah. And so she makes him sign in blood, naturally. And he signs it. And that's kind of that. Almost again, it's almost like we were talking about with the Phantom of the Paradise, that almost Faustian bit to it now. But anyway, he goes to sleep and all the rest of it. And he wakes up and he and there's a guy who's off his nut, completely off his nut, cooking in the kitchen, and he gives him some. This bit always makes me kind of wince, because the food is described as webbed meat.
Yeah.
Oh, webbed. So it's got like that fascia over it, that kind of.
Yeah, it's kind of like.
It didn't make sense to me until much later on, when we discover the spinning wheel.
Yeah.
And then I visualised it in a completely different way altogether.
Yes.
It was almost net-like, and that was the kind of web, as opposed to it. Because at one point I was thinking, is this like duck's feet or something? What is this?
So it's like weaved meat, isn't it? It's very strange.
Yeah.
There's something about it. It just kind of conjures up that, if meat's been left, like a stew's been left to spoil, and you get that almost webbed effect on the top, that skin.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
That's kind of where I was heading with it, because I'm a chef, so I've seen all kinds of horrors over the time.
This sort of scene reminds me a little bit as I think, Robert Aikman's story, where a guy stays in a very strange hotel, and there's a scene in the dining room where he sees that one of the guests is chained to the table, for example, and and the food is described in very much the same way, and there's something kind of sort of League of Gentlemanly about it.
Yes.
Where it's a very quite smart setting. We're in a very, in a way, posh place, richly decorated and very cultured, obviously, but the food is just, there's something not quite right about this food, and perhaps you think twice before putting it in your mouth, and it's very unsettling.
There's the line that it's just covered in a stodgy bechamel, and I love the way he flips this here, because from the description you expect one sort of reaction from the protagonist, but you get an entirely different one because he puts it in his mouth and you're expecting him to go, "Oh, what the fucking hell's this?" But he doesn't. He says, "Oh, this is delicious."
Yeah. And the guy says,
Yeah.
"It is our daily staple."
Yeah, that's all you're going to eat is that. So it's a good job you like it, kind of.
Whatever that is.
Yeah, and
He belongs there, doesn't he?
Yeah.
He belongs there.
Yeah.
We think that this is a guy who's got to get out and escape because hideous things are going to happen to him. But he seems to be very content.
yeah. I mean, he's obviously
one of us.
developing kind of feelings towards this Pyrrha woman. Well, one feeling really, lust, and then now he's met this guy who gives him this food which he likes, and this is where Hank becomes an unreliable narrator, in my opinion, because he notices that the guy in the cook is off his noddle, right? So he really just turns around and goes, "What are you on?" And he hands him this red pill.
Yes.
And I like that. It's the red. It takes the red pill down the rabbit hole. He goes. I like that. I think that's a great little touch.
It's like we're one level into Alice in Wonderland, and now we're going to the next level. We're going
Exactly.
Yeah.
It feels like that, doesn't it? It feels like that kind of a narrative, and I suppose a bit like Gormenghast as well. It's like a tour of a place and meeting odd characters along the way.
And the guy also says to him, "Oh, and you're all alone in the world."
Yes.
Which is quite a worrying question.
Yeah, and so he even mentions, doesn't he, that it's fate, and because he says, like, "How did you get here?" He's like, "Oh, I just found myself here." We've all found ourselves here. It's like this home of waifs and strays, isn't it? So he takes this pill and he goes waddling off, and then Pyrrha appears, pushing Iblis in his wheelchair, and Iblis has got this wooden box, which he opens to reveal these spliffs, basically. So Hank, being of that kind of leaning, takes it out, sparks it up, and promptly goes off his tits, and tries to. He falls into Pyrrha, and then effectively tries to force himself upon her.
Yeah.
To which Iblis takes umbrage and jumps on him and attacks him, and sticks a nail under his eye and draws blood, scratches his face and draws blood, and he throws Iblis off. And then, just as he's about to pass out, he sees Pyrrha. I keep calling her Pyrrha. Is that a name? It is, isn't it? Yeah, Pyrrha.
Yeah,
because I've got a friend called Pierra, so I keep getting confused. And you see the veil lean in, and he feels something licking at it, and then he crashes out. So obviously she's, tasting his blood, which is a nice touch.
What she's described as, he says this, "My face nestled in her hair, my nostrils took in the scent of her etiolated flesh." I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that right. Etiolated, which basically means lacking any vigour or substance. Yeah. It's a botanic term generally. I guess you can think of maybe when you have flowers in a vase, and like 2 weeks after you've bought them, they're still
they're sort of withered,
colourful, but they're kind of faded, aren't they?
Yeah, and if you touch them, they're almost like they've lost all their sort of firmness, sort of limp.
But the scent of her etiolated flesh as well, very vibrant sort of description again.
There's something quite Keats about this. I remember there was one poem, I was Ode to Joy, which is all about endless pleasures nigh, and beauty that must die, and beauty doesn't last, and all of this kind of thing. It kind of felt like that to me.
Yeah. Is there a hint of the necrophilia almost in this, perhaps?
Oh, yeah. And again, that's something that is touched on in quite a lot of Pugmire stuff. Sort of necromantic, almost. There is an almost kind of, beauty in death kind of thing going on in a lot of
it.
It's
very vampirical, isn't it?
Yes. Yeah, very.
Yeah. There's very much of that yellow period as well. The Wilds and the Beardsleys, and I suppose Poe was a little bit earlier, but
yes,
very much that sense.
Yeah, and there's almost something Byronic to it as well, isn't there? And it's almost like the Romantic poets meets Lovecraft. It's a lot. It's a lot. I don't think. I think I'm quite safe in saying this, that there is no other stuff like Pugmire's for that, which is something I really like it for, because it is totally unique in what it does. This feels different, you know.
Yeah.
And
But what's interesting, though, Tim, is that there was one of the biographies of Lovecraft I was reading where he was described as being very dandyish himself.
Yes, he was. Yeah.
And that he was very much like a romantic poet.
Yeah.
In the way that with his countenance and everything, and so is that actually Lovecraftian then?
Yeah, maybe.
Because
he did actually see himself as of out of time, didn't he?
Yeah.
Mm. He did see himself as out of time and out of place, because he saw himself as an Englishman.
Well, I was going to say very Anglophile as well, which goes straight into your Oscar Wilde.
Exactly.
And I guess when we think about it in time terms, this was only when was Lovecraft born? You're only looking at 20 years before that. The Oscar Wilde would have been sort of 1880s, that kind of time, I guess. So. Yes. Yeah. In a way, this is
sort of a generation or two generations before.
Yeah, it's like us looking back to the 60s, kind of almost.
Yeah, looking back to the hippies, the hippie movement. Yeah, it's no real different. Yeah, it's so he's sort of a man out of time there, and you can actually see that in a lot of his work, because he actually, it's like we've discussed with Pickman's model again. There is something very almost M.R. James about it, like we discussed with Canon Elbrick's scrapbook.
Yeah.
There is something very Jamesian, and the people he liked were of that sort of earlier time. Like Chambers was slightly before, and Machen certainly was, and Blackwood and M.R. James. They were sort of his big influences, weren't they? And they were sort of like a generation preceding him. So,
and he then brings in that bang up to date Einsteinian physics, and the nuclear chaos, and the complete rejection of organised religion, or certainly the established religions, which those people would have been very much a part of, even in terms of challenging it. So maybe again, I don't know too much about Wilde, but maybe he was someone who would have challenged the religious establishment of the day.
I would have assumed so, considering his leanings.
Whereas Lovecraft wouldn't challenge it; he'd just say it doesn't exist. He's not attacking anything on religious grounds as such. He's saying there's nothing.
There is a great story of Oscar Wilde frolicking in the garden with one of his boyfriends, and they're hosing each other down. And the local vicar walks past the gate
vicar?
And looks over, and he says to him, "Oh God, Wilde, what are you doing?" And Oscar Wilde replied, "I am being Greek, sir."
Brilliant. That is brilliant.
There's this kind of thing there that's basically saying, there's something classical in what I'm doing, something that predates the church, and something, that this is what civilization is, And,
that's amazing. I bet that shut him up, didn't it?
Yeah, I bet it did. So I think that says a lot about what Oscar Wilde probably thought of religion. It's like, you're telling me that this is the way, but in actual fact, that's after the point. Civilization doesn't start with this, it starts with...
Well, most of the early Christian writings would have been in Greek as well.
Oh, of course.
If you look at the Greek Orthodox Church, is one of the oldest churches.
Yeah.
Along with, I think the Ethiopian is another very old one, the Coptic churches. Yeah. So, it is exactly what you say there, that very old... The foundations of our civilization, in air quotes,
in commas,
is in that type of society. Yeah.
Is in frolicking in the garden and hosing each other down.
Well, actually, funny that, because again with Pugmire, there is a lot in his stuff of naked men frolicking in gardens, so that's probably where that comes from. Yeah, it probably comes from them. Well, now we go on to the sort of the the occult book. We go. Hank goes to sleep. He wakes up and he looks out the window, or at least we think he wakes up. We're not entirely. This is what I mean about it. He becomes a bit of an unreliable narrator because we don't know whether he's awake, dreaming, or completely off his tits.
Dreams within dreams, isn't it?
Yeah, dreams within dreams, and with and he sees out the window and there's a figure dancing by the lake wearing a mask, which is what I wanted to come back to the yellow pajamas, because that is an incredibly Chambers image.
Yes,
of the wraith-like woman dancing by the lake wearing the mask. It's Casilda at Harley, isn't it? It's
totally. And we had that earlier thing about her singing the song from the play.
Yes,
we know it's Shakespeare, but there's still that image there.
Yeah. There is again a very Chamber again, because I mean his stuff was incredibly decadent in feel. So there's got to be a Chambers influence on this story. I would say anyway. So he goes out because he thinks it's Pyrrha. But there's a lovely bit where he says that he's looking at her. It's almost like he can see through her.
Yeah.
Which is interesting. Like she's always fading out of existence kind of thing. And he goes out there and he can't find her. And then something fleshy goes for his face. It's this mask.
Fleshy.
It's like a mask of flesh. It's almost like Leatherface, isn't it? And then Jesus appears and tears it off and throws it in the lake and basically gives him a right rollicking. Like, what you're doing out after dark kind of thing. You don't come out here after dark. And this is where Hank starts going, hang on a minute. There's something fucking weird going on here. It's like, I think pennies started to drop now. And he goes inside and he says, was it Pyrrha? Because he thinks it's Pyrrha. By the lake, but he goes, no, it's not. It's somebody called Alma. It's like, oh, I'd like to meet her, and he says, well, you can't. She's faded. Yeah. So he goes in, and and whose room is this? And this is Alma's room, but there's no painting. The painting is gone. So he says, well, where's her painting? Everybody's got a painting. Where's Alma's painting? And he said, it's been taken down to the catacombs, which is just brilliant.
Yeah.
So you have this a bit where he says he wants to go and see it, wants to go and see this painting. And he goes down, and it's obviously now this sort of penny starts dropping with the photographs, and the people who are no longer there, their paintings have been moved down into the catacombs. He's starting to put two and two together here, that there's some kind of link with the photographs and with the paintings. And when the paintings fade, you fade, and you become the painting, which I think is amazing. It's almost, again, it's very wild, isn't it? It's almost like, great.
Well, there is a character in there at some point who Hank says to him, oh, this looks like you in the picture. And he says, it's how I will be.
Yeah, it's Oscar with the tuberculosis. Yeah, because he's down there in the cellar. And by now he's started to look really ill, like really sickly. And there's a bit as well where Hank's crashed out in his room before he goes to bed. And he's sitting in a chair. And I think it's Pyrrha. I can't remember. I think it's Pyrrha that says, you need to go into bed because that's how it works.
Because they seem to be getting him to sleep quite a lot, don't they? A couple of times, it's
yes.
kind of, you must be feeling tired. Take a nap.
Yes.
And then this other thing I like when we're down in the catacombs with Oscar, it's I took hold of the man's hand and examined its sulphur yellow pigment. His face had also grown more discoloured, and his sad hazel eyes had submerged within dark hollows. The elder ones have worked their alchemy, and this was kind of reminding me of the Mask of the Red Death. The sickened scent of his polluted flesh, the skin that reeked of death.
Yes.
Again, very vivid imagery.
Yeah. It's a lovely scene down there. And you just get this impression that Hank is now starting to think, maybe I shouldn't have signed my name in that old book
in blood.
Yeah. The next kind of story beat is that he's given a pipe, isn't he? He's given some more. He goes up and he meets the woman in charge. I can't remember her name, but and she gives him a pipe to suck on. So it's more drugs. It's something she picked up in Burma or something. So it's opium, isn't it? It's good. So now we got the opium coming into it. Yeah, this is where we get to the her basically knitting flesh, isn't it?
Mm.
She's got the spinning wheel. She's knitting Iblis fingers, which I think is a great image, isn't it? It's just like she's sitting there, and Iblis is just kind of quite happy sitting there in his wheelchair.
Yeah. That's beautiful,
Yeah.
isn't it? That's beautiful.
Yeah.
It put me in mind of a line from a Tom Waits song, making feet for children's shoes.
Yes.
Oh, yes.
Nice.
It might have been Singapore was maybe the song. I'd have to check on that. While making feet for children's shoes through the alley back from hell, when you hear the steeple bell, it's very much that imagery again, that feeling.
It's painless as well, isn't it? It doesn't hurt him.
Mm.
It's also Sleeping Beauty, isn't it? And obviously the sleeping aspect and the beauty aspect are themes within this. And I thought more so with characters coming up later, which I thought was a direct reference to Macbeth coming up.
Yeah, I think I would have said so, especially with the Shakespeare references all going through it. And the fact that, because obviously the character likes his Shakespeare, so it made sense for these three that we're going to get to in a bit who should be in his painting. There's a lot going on all the way through it. But I love this bit. Deftly, she took up a pair of slender steel knitting needles, implements with which she worked at length of fibrous flesh into the hand on which Iblis wore 2 digits. My gut twisted as I watched her work, moving the needles into his flesh. Her hands stained by spilling blood. Iblis neither screamed nor squirmed, and when at last he held to me his gory limb, I saw that the hand now wore a newly formed 3rd finger. Oh, man. It's just...
Nice.
There's something interesting there, though, isn't there? It's like other people are fading, but he's being rebuilt.
Yes.
Yeah.
What's...
Well, perhaps he is the servitor that they have to keep going to keep the whole place running.
Yeah, well, there's the other guy as well, the cook. That he didn't have a painting. He had a strange, like, black void in his wall. That he just taken the opium, so you can't really taking the red pill, so you can't really take what Hank's saying here. But he puts his hand to it, and it's like his fingers disappear into it.
So it is kind of outside of this process.
Yeah. So there's him and Iblis, and I would say the woman as well, that are kind of like they're the owners of the house, I would say, because I mean in my head I've seen them as man, wife, and Iblis as the son.
Yeah,
that's kind of how I've seen it in my head, and everybody else has kind of been drifted in almost by osmosis,
or drawn in.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing through a lot of, like saying about the Sesqua Valley, that there is a thing, it calling to people of an artistic bent and drawing them into its confines, and then either assimilating them or devouring them. There's that thing, isn't there? Like some people are consumed by their art, some people consume art. It's that whole thing.
I was just going to say that entire Seattle music scene is just full of stories of people just going by the wayside due to drug use and what have you.
Well, Cobain, Alice in Chains, Chris Cornell from Soundgarden, Mother Love Bone, what's his face?
Yeah, heroin was a massive thing.
Yeah.
It's never really made sense to me as to why it seemed to be artistic to take heroin.
Yeah, it was a very, very insular and very destructive scene, wasn't it? Yeah, so after this scene of the weaving flesh, there's a break, and outside, storms finally passed, and it's a bright, sunny day. And he goes out, and the inhabitants are all sort of playing a game, aren't they? They're playing this strange, almost like blind man's buff kind of thing, where they'd be blindfolded and hold their hands up. And he doesn't want to take part because he's kind of, I guess he's one of these that's kind of too cool for school. But he's eventually like bullied into it almost. And so he does it, he's blindfolded and he holds his hands and he feels a stubbly, scratchy surface and fleshy lips and freaks out. And tears off the thing, and a crow flies away, which again is an incredible, almost it's a Poe thing, isn't it?
Yeah, with a little hint of M.R. James as well, with the touch in the face.
Yes.
Yeah.
Which it's an incredibly sort of creepy scene, but it's an incredibly important scene when it comes to what happens next. There is actually a line from Poe in it, isn't there? Flapping from out their condor wings, invisible bow, whatever. Yeah. So rising, he walks out of the place, following the road upwards, back to the house. All lights inside, it's all gone off now. And Pyrrha sort of appeared. She's obviously been left. She's gone a bit crazed with something because she's sort of stomping around, babbling. And basically she's doing the Ophelia thing, isn't she, at this point? And a veil falls down. And the crimson necklace was a copy of the one in the Titan painting.
The artist is Titian.
Oh, shit. Sorry, my fault.
But I don't know if that's a connection, if there is a Titan connection there. It was something that I kind of overlooked. Titian was on the run himself. At one point for a murder, and theories are that he was very guilty about it and that he did a lot of paintings of decapitated heads and stuff as a remorse. He did a lot of paintings of John the Baptist and the like.
Yeah, Salome with the head of John the Baptist, wasn't it?
Yeah,
yeah.
He was an amazing artist, but I'm not sure what period it was, and obviously Hank's on the run.
Yeah, Titian was Renaissance, 1490 to 1576.
Yes, right. Yeah, so he goes in and he unfastens the torn veil and lets it drift to the wooden floor. And there's this line here where it says, "I know when one is dead and when one lives, he's dead as earth. Why should a dog, a rat, a witch have life when he have no breath at all? Of whom do you speak, kind lady? I did not find his likeness in the album. Where is his photograph?" So there's this whole bit now leading up to it. It's the Titan, which is obviously one of the previous inhabitants, who was her lover, I think.
Yes.
Yeah, it was her lover, and she's kind of looking for him. I think it's almost like she's kind of realised that she's been changed by the painting, and she's always like having remembrances of a previous life. I mean, I don't know how you guys would see it, but that's kind of how I saw it in my head. We get to the bit, he goes up to his room and he goes to wash his face and he feels his features, and it's the same feeling that he had outside. So it was his own face he was feeling when he felt the sort of the crow thing, and he feels the fleshy lips. So it's obvious by now he's become a ghoul, hasn't he? He's been altered by the Pickman painting and has been ghoulified, basically, which is interesting because we've often wondered how ghouls were created, haven't we?
It's something we've spoken about a few times, isn't it? So here's one option.
Yeah,
he likes the smell of earth and bodies and decay as well a lot. I noticed.
Yes, well, that's obviously his transition, isn't it? Because he starts mentioning more of this as it progresses. The descriptions change of the smells into more, like you say, the necrotic and all that. It's all everything smells of decaying flesh, sort of thing, and tombs.
I thought he was going to start eating dirt at one point.
Yes,
there was a suggestion that he was going to actually start scoffing down on it.
Yes, yeah. Well, there is that disorder, isn't there? I can't remember the name of it, but there is that like disorder where people do eat dirt.
Oh God!
Yeah,
aren't pregnant women sometimes supposed to eat coal dust or something? Is that a common sort of? I don't know if it's true or not.
Yeah, I remember reading in the news at one point there was a woman who ate soiled nappies.
Oh,
there was a pregnancy thing. Yeah, I know, right? It is strange, isn't it? Yeah. So now we get into what John briefly mentioned earlier. We get he hears the wailing from the window, the wailing and the singing and the mournful songs, and he goes out, and it's the cemetery over the road or something, isn't there? And he goes across, and there's the tree, and then there's the three women who, as John quite rightfully said, it's the three witches from Macbeth, isn't it?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Yeah,
I think they're even described as three sisters, aren't they?
They are, yes, yeah. And again, their description is very similar to the description of the sort of, but also he also weaves in a bit, almost making them sound attractive again. Yeah. You know, which I really like that. It's that juxtaposition, isn't it, between like grotesque and withered old.
It's Greek, isn't it? I mean, the three sisters are also the three facets of the mother goddess.
Oh, right. So
the hag,
the maid, the crone,
the mother, the crone. Yeah.
It also goes back to the Gorgons. That sometimes there's three Gorgons, and they were all beautiful women who then became so vain that they were turned into Gorgons. But there's also stories that there's three witches who all share one eye, and Perseus has to take the eye, and then from that he can then work out where Medusa is. So there's quite a lot of connotations there with three women that does lean back into being Greek. Again.
Being Greek.
But that whole thing had strong roots in the classical, didn't it? That whole that decadent era was very much looking back in terms of the design, even the Beardsley stuff to some extent. There's that very classical lines almost. It's very clean in that sense.
Yes. Yeah. So and he goes and there's a woman. It's the Spacius painting come to life.
Yeah.
There's the three shadowy figures from the painting who turn out to be the three witches from Macbeth. And hanging from the tree is Pyrrha, isn't it?
Yeah. What's that, John, you might know this, what's the painting of the woman floating in the water?
It's Ophelia by John Everett Millais. He also did paintings of Perseus and I was going to say Andromeda. I don't think it is Andromeda.
Because that's the exact image we've got just coming up, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, because one of the crones turns with a camera and gets Hank's picture. So that's the picture for the album. It's the same as the thing. And I guess they're going two birds, one stone here, because Iblis, with his new fingers, scuttles up the tree and takes her down and lays her body in the lake, doesn't he? Which is the Ophelia thing, which is above her bed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just how the Ophelia then. Yeah.
Cool. So this is the Millais picture, right?
Yes.
Floating in the water with the flowers.
Yeah. But of course, Millais was also a pre-Raphaelite, and they were all decadent as well. So
same era again, right? We're in the same.
Cool.
Yeah.
What about the spheres, though? What was that all about?
Yeah, I saw one pale globe that rose to kiss the back of her neck. That moved this.
He did mention spheres briefly previously.
I think that is supposed to be her ex-lover.
Oh,
I think because he'd faded.
Right.
That's why he was in the catacombs and why he wasn't there anymore. He'd faded away. I think that's supposed to be him. That's how I saw it. I think that, almost like a spirit orb. Kind
yes,
of.
I was to say like an orb, like your stereotypical what you get in the digital photos now.
Like your spirit lights sort of thing.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what I took from that. But I like the fact it's open to interpretation. But yeah.
So in a way, it's kind of a happy ending, sort of a nice ending.
In a weird way.
She's reunited with her lover. And they are both now these spirit lights in this beautiful pool.
Which I believe is Cymbeline. I don't know if it's Cymbeline or Cymbeline. I don't know. I know the song Cymbeline.
I'm Cymbeline.
That's basically a couple of lovers. They're married her father is the king, is Cymbeline. He doesn't like the fact that she's married to this bloke because he wants her to marry off to somebody else for royal reasons. And so they split up. And basically, the whole thing is basically, are they going to get back together again? So,
yeah.
But that's nice. That's one of the things I like about this story, apart from the language and the way it's written, is I like stories where you get references to all these other things. And this is packed with them. We've got half a dozen painters in here. We've got Poe. I think Swinburne is mentioned at one time. I feel like it gives you lots of stuff to go away and research and read about. Or, you might know some of it already. But I like that added depth. You get something from it beyond just reading a story.
Richness.
That's yes.
Yeah. It just dawned on me the reason why. Right, when the lover is in Italy, he then meets a scoundrel who then basically places a bet that he can seduce his wife, for want of a better word, back home. And he goes, and then he fails, but he sees that she's got a mole or something or other on her somewhere, but he uses that as proof to the husband that he has slept with her. Then he writes letters saying, I can't believe that you've done that. She has no idea what he's talking about. So it's all that Shakespearean thing. So in some respects, you can look at Hank in this as being, he's tried to seduce her, force himself on her and failed. She's his love interest. And then at the end, maybe she's reunited with the person she was supposed to. So Cymbeline was important.
Yeah.
Cymbeline.
Yes.
Yeah. And it's high time.
Well, that's the thing. I mean, I've read it a bunch of times now, and every time I pick up on some other little bit that I hadn't really noticed before. I love stories like that. It's like you can read it a dozen times and go, oh, I never thought of that before. It's like there's something you mentioned earlier. It's like, oh, that I never twigged that before.
Yeah.
And it was when I was reading it earlier, I twigged up the Chambers reference, which I hadn't picked up on the first time. But that's it. I mean, it's almost like he cherry-picked all these bits and sort of smushed it all together and created his own monster out of it. And I just think it's a tremendous bit of work.
And also, mentioning the Mask of the Red Death, it never dawned on me before how much in that film the Red Death is basically the Yellow King.
Yeah.
But in red. The images are exactly the same.
Yeah, we've got to cover that.
Yes, I definitely.
And I think this is one of the Lovecraftian aspects, right, where Lovecraft took all the classic Lovecraft, taking the true things and the fictional things. So you got Hammer of the Witches, Malleus Maleficarum next to Devimus, whatever, next to now Sprecklich and Colton, next to witch cults in Western Europe.
Oh, Margaret Murray. Yeah. The Book of Dizan always gets thrown in there as well, doesn't
it? and it also, his big thing as a kid was Greek mythology.
Yes.
He renounced Christianity and said he was going to worship, was it Pan?
Apollo,
he said himself.
or something.
Apollo.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's even got that element in it, hasn't it?
I think this is his mastery, Pugmire's mastery, is he manages to combine all these elements together seamlessly.
Yes.
None of it jars, where we can talk about a Derleth, for example, who can write Lovecraftian stories that come across more as a Call of Cthulhu adventure.
Yeah.
We've spoken before about the shopping list.
The Derlethian shopping list,
Yeah. It's just kind of thrown in, isn't it, as a prop almost. Whereas this, it feels like an integral part of the story. And if you then research that, you think, right, so that was that and this was this.
Yeah. Is it
like John said, richness.
It's much more intelligent, actually, and literary, because these are literary practices.
Oh, well, that's the thing. Pugmire was incredibly literary. A lot of his stuff is, it's steeped in literature, and not just like pulp stuff and what's come before him in his chosen genre. It is steeped in literature and classical mythology. And
I thought there was something really interesting that he described that character at the beginning. He describes himself as not being an intellectual, And yet you very quickly learn, actually, he is.
Well, he recognises all these paintings, right? Which probably not many of us would.
Yeah.
But I love the way that he said he loved to mix high art with low art. And it's one of the reasons why I always liked Lovecraft as well, because I always thought that that's what he was doing.
Yeah.
But that's Pugmire as well, I would say, a mixture of high art and low art. Because you got one end of it, he's into his Oscar Wilde and his all this and the classical poets, but he's also into his New York Dolls and
punk rock.
Yeah.
But this is the whole decadent era again, right? Where you're having this fantastic opium dream where you're flying through Ulthar or Cellophase or something, and you wake up and you're in a dingy cockroach-ridden room in Chinatown in Limehouse or something.
Yeah,
It's that juxtaposition of the two the whole time that makes it. If it was just one or the other, it might be a bit relentless or a bit too fantastic. But that combination of the two really works well.
I think things have come a long way. I mean, to the point where a superhero film can now win Oscars. I mean, that would never have happened before. I mean, you can't get more high art meets low art than that.
No, it's true.
Yeah, but as we know now, we were talking about comics and graphic novels earlier. They can be as equally hard-hitting and rich as any other literary work.
Totally agree.
They've moved into that adult, I don't know if that's the right word, but they've moved into that sphere as opposed to being just, well, I guess in a way, the pulps of their day. Marvel in the 60s and 70s was the pulps, I guess, wasn't it?
Oh yeah. Well,
and then you've also got somebody like Alex Raymond, who did Flash Gordon, who was an incredible artist, but yet what he's producing is pulp. And then Frank Frazetta, coming on afterwards. I mean, these are artists who know what they're doing with anatomy. They understand pose, they understand material, they understand lighting, all of this amazing stuff. It's still just Renaissance art. But
it still would be seen as, that's just fantasy art, right? So the barbarian picture or whatever it is a fantastic composition in all sorts of ways, but it's just,
I think it's great. There's Frazetta in the Smithsonian. I think that's brilliant.
Quite right too.
And he's deemed to be a great American artist.
I agree. Yeah.
I mean, it typifies American culture, though, as well, I think. It is borrowed from the European, and which is considered great, but then reduced down to consumerism. That is America, isn't it?
Or Andy Warhol.
Yeah, pretty much, yeah.
Okay, so that's our first foray into the world of William Hopfrog Pugmire. I'm sure we'll be returning. It's a very rich place.
I'd love to at some point. So, like I say, I'm a big fan. And I just before we move on, I'd just love to just tell people what he liked to refer to himself as, which I think sums the man up perfectly. He referred to himself as the Queen of Eldritch Horror.
Oh, that's nice.
Yeah.
You gotta love it. You gotta love it.
There's a wonderful photo of him signing books that I found where he had the most amazing hat on that he'd obviously made himself, with skulls hanging off it. It's got Boy George, and then it's got Shakespeare on it as well.
Yeah.
Brilliant. If you haven't read any Pugmire, then we would advise you to immediately go out and do so, of course. And of course we shall be returning in the future. Well, I think that's it for today's tour. We spoke about quite a lot of things there from one story, which I think is an indication of the depth of the story.
Yep.
The buses already turn up outside, so we're not going to have time for dagonsack this visit, unfortunately. But I gather dagonsack is still recovering anyway, Tim, from...
Yeah, it's taken ages to thaw it out.
Frostbite. Yeah. Just where you don't want it.
Oh, frostbite of the sack. That's
It's like a giant walnut shell.
But do send your missives in, because Dagon does read every one of your queries, even the spam mail. So do send any questions in to dagonsack@outlook.com. All right, well, thanks for joining us today, folks. Thanks again to all our patrons, of course, and if you want to join them and help us spread our tentacles further, there's details up on the Patreon site. You may have noticed our episodes are also now going up on YouTube as well. So if you like those, you can subscribe to the Innsmouth Book Club channel on YouTube, and please do share and tell all your friends, or tell your enemies as well. You know, we don't mind. Now, speaking of patrons, we're going to do a Patron Special for our next episode, I believe, and we're covering what were we covering?
The Whisperer in the Darkness.
Oh yes,
classic,
Darkness,
classic
yes.
bit of Lovecraft.
Yeah, one of his best mythos stories, I think.
Oh yeah,
And,
yeah, definitely. So that's one of his best creations, in my opinion. I love the Mego.
Yes,
I love them. I think they're great. The giant fungus bugs from Pluto. Brilliant.
It's that nice blend of science fiction and horror and the occult again, isn't it?
Yeah.
So yeah, we're looking forward to reading that one. We'll probably get that out maybe next week or so, and then after that we've got some interviews being lined up with some very interesting guests, and we're going to be getting into some authors we've not covered yet, like Robert Bloch in particular as well.
Yep.
So that's going to be coming up in the next couple of months. Anyway, I think that's all for now. So in the meantime, thanks again for joining us, and it's goodbye from me, Rob Poynton.
It's goodbye from me, Tim Mendes.
And it's goodbye from me, John Chadwick.